Hi, I'm Scott, and welcome back to Child in Time, growing up in the 60s. Yeah, the first thing I'm going to say is I know it's been quite a gap between episodes, and well, the reason for that is I've been writing a book, which I've completed. It's with the editor at the moment, and if you like this podcast, I'm sure you're going to love the book. So I'm really excited about it. I won't say anything more until it is available, and I'll talk to you about it then. But we're back, and there's going to be many more episodes. Now I've got the book writing thing out of the way for the moment. So today I thought we'd look at and possibly explode some of the myths about the 1960s from someone who was there. They say that if you remember the 60s, you weren't there. You've probably heard that said. That's wrong. That's wrong. It's something which gets repeated often enough, and people regard it to be true. It's called a factoid. So it's not a fact. It's wrong, but people assume it is anyway. All right, so the first myth we want to look at is, in the groovy 60s, everyone was a hippie. No. It was still, certainly in Australia, and I'm sure many parts of America and the UK, very conservative. Me, I was a suburban hippie, and that meant that I no longer liked things or disliked them. I dug it. Yeah, I dig that, man. Or if I didn't like things, no, it's not cool. And I had a couple of cheesecloth shirts, and on my wall I had posters of Joe Cocker and Frank Zappa. Yeah, man. But overall, most of us were just faux hippies. We weren't real ones. We were living at home with mum and dad. Another myth. Everyone in the 60s, well, a lot of people were on drugs. No, they weren't. There was some drug use. Sure, there was. But one of the important things was that the marijuana was of a much less potent strength than the turbocharged stuff around today. This has been very, very well documented, according to many sources. Now, the real drugs back in the 60s were alcohol and tobacco. They were the choice of most people. And as I've said before, people smoked on public transport, they smoked on the bus, they smoked in the train, people smoked at the movies, in their cars with their children, in shops, and a lot of smoking. I remember in high school, a couple of my teachers used to smoke while they were teaching. And I think a lot of 60s movies give a bit of a distorted picture of the amount of illicit drug use that was about. Films like Easy Rider. Although when I first saw Easy Rider, when it was first shown in Australia, our censors cut 13 minutes from the film to eliminate any depictions of any sort of drug use. It was only decades later I got to saw the film as it was made. Another myth that the famous Woodstock 3-day music festival was a wonderful, fantastic experience. Well, if you read reports and eyewitness accounts of people who attended it, That was far from the case. Now, I attended the concert site a few years ago, and while it was a great natural rural amphitheatre, it looked to me like a crowd of about 50,000 would fit comfortably in front of the stage. But there was an estimated 500,000 people there. So the organisers were woefully underprepared for such numbers. And there wasn't adequate toilet or showering facilities. I don't think there was barely any showering facilities at all. There was not enough food for the multitude. For some of the time, it rained heavily on all the tents and everything. There was insufficient medical help for the numerous drug overdoses and injuries. 3 people died at the festival. So I think the best and the only way to enjoy the wonderful music was to watch the Woodstock film in a comfortable movie theatre. But the Woodstock myth lives on, and a lot of the music was great. Everyone opposed the Vietnam War. No. There was a lot of resistance. There was protests and marches and conscientious objectors, etc. And that grew when Australia sent troops to Vietnam and we had soldiers killed. But we were fed a solid narrative from the government that if Vietnam fell to the communists, then they would take the next country and then the next country and move down until Australia itself was under threat from invasion for the expansionist communists. And this was called the domino effect. It wasn't true, but we believed it. I was personally concerned that I might be called up for 2 years national service, which may have included all expenses paid trip to Vietnam for 12 months to fight. And I was 6 months away from having to register for national service. But a new government got in and abolished national service on the spot, which is a major factor in a change of government. So I could keep my luxurious shoulder-length hair. And I wasn't forced to go in the military. And in my research about this Vietnam War, I didn't realise that, and these are American sources, but there was a lot of horrible things, any war, and certainly in Vietnam, the suffering, the injury, the death, etc. But only 30% of the troops that went to Vietnam saw combat. I thought it'd be much more than that. No, it's only 30%. And the rest were sort of like in non-combat roles or zones. Yeah. And just a bit of trivia, you know the Monkee song, the last train to Clarksville? I'll take the last train to Clarksville and I'll meet you at the station. The Monkee song, very big hit. I didn't know that's an anti-war song. Clarksville was where draftees would go. And in the song, he says, and I don't know when I'm ever coming home. So I didn't know that until not that long ago. Some years ago, I saw the Vietnam War memorials in Washington, D.C., the statue and the wall there. And I think they're very good, understated, but poignant memorials in Washington, D.C. I'm sure a lot of my American listeners have probably been there. Just on that, I will be back in the US in June 26. I will be there for the Soccer World Cup. And I've got tickets to the Australian group games. The first one's in Vancouver. Then there's the big one. Australia plays the USA in Seattle. And then some days after that, our final game against Paraguay, I think, is in Santa Clara, near San Francisco. So look, when we play the USA in Seattle, come up and say hello. Come up and say hi. Hi, Scott. Love your podcast. And I'm sure that'll be very easy. There's only going to be about 70,000 people there. And just on that, I was at an event not that long ago, and some people, listeners, came up and we chatted, and then they said, "Can we have a selfie?" And I stood there and did some selfies with some people. And the only problem was we were at a funeral, truly. But anyway, it was after the service. Okay, next one. The baby boomers led all the changes of the 1960s. No. Most, if not all, of the leaders of the youth movement and the people who were influencing and bringing the changes, which there most definitely was, famous musicians, etc., they weren't baby boomers. If you define someone a baby boomer born between 1945 and 1964, no. The people setting the trends were pretty much all born before 1945. Dylan, the Beatles, Timothy Leary, many others. In 1969, I was 14. I wasn't changing the world. I was just trying to keep up with the latest, man. So, was life better in the 1960s? Well, we could, please discuss. And that's a lot of the stuff I compare and contrast in this podcast, as to my regular listeners know that. When we talk about life in the 60s, there was certainly less of it. In the mid-1960s in Australia, a male could expect to live until he was 67.6 years old on average, and females was just over 74 years. The latest figures I could get was the average length of life is 81 years for males and 85 for females. But you need to live longer to pay off your mortgage on property, as the cost of buying a house, certainly in Australia, well, the cost of buying a house, it's gone through the roof. See what I did there? So in inflation-adjusted terms, and I've done extensive research on this, in 1970, you could buy 5.2 houses for the same amount needed to buy a single property today. That's in early 2026. The small house I grew up in suburban Sydney has recently been demolished. I've mentioned it plenty of times in this podcast. And now it's been replaced by some soulless duplexes. Why am I telling you that? No reason at all, really. Just that the old house isn't there anymore. Okay, well, it's good to be back, and I promise that there's not going to be such a lengthy gap. I'm going to be putting out more episodes soon. And thanks for listening. It's great to be talking to you again, and we will talk soon. Bye now.